Hardcore Henry has one of the most unique premises for an action movie that I've seen in some time, mainly due to how it's shot rather than the actual story. It's an indie film with a budget of about $10 million, which is minuscule by Hollywood standards, but I have to say that there's a lot of very obvious effort put into it that results in a fun time. The entire movie is shot in a first-person view from the eyes of the protagonist, Henry. One interesting aspect is that the movie's very first scene, which is before a stylized and very gruesome credits montage and then the actual story, isn't one that's been showcased in trailers, and I honestly worried for a second that my theater was playing the wrong movie. But that's not the case, and it does tie into the movie thematically at the very end. The movie properly starts with Henry waking up, tied to a table in a futuristic-looking room of some sort. His arm is missing from the elbow down, and his leg's missing from the knee down. The first character he meets is his wife Estelle, who explains that Henry was injured and all but killed in some sort of accident, and I actually don't recall the movie actually saying what that accident was. I have the impression that they could have said it at one point and I just missed it, so feel free to correct me. Estelle is one of the researchers in charge of a project to revive Henry with robotic limb replacements, and we also find out later that most of his innards have been replaced with machinery. This also ties into the fact that Henry never speaks, as right when he's about to have his voice module restored, our main villain, Aiken, who is some sort of eccentric European tycoon with telekinesis, who's been backing the whole project financially, just busts in and he demands that Henry be turned over for his own, nefarious purposes that we find out more of as the movie continues. Henry and Estelle eventually sneak away and get into an escape pod, and it turns out this whole lab is in some sort of a blimp, which is interesting. And then they land in the streets of Russia, where the rest of the movie takes place. Aiken's men quickly track them down and capture Estelle, but Henry manages to escape and soon meets his main ally through the film, a guy named Jimmy, who's played by, for me, the film's most recognizable face, Charlton Copley, best known for playing major roles in every Neil Blomkamp movie like District 9 and Chappie, and also being in that A-Team remake a couple years back. He tells Henry he can help him settle the score with Aiken, and from there, the film mainly becomes a string of various set pieces as Henry evades his pursuers, tracks down his own prey, and partakes in all sorts of ridiculous but impressive action, like gunplay, fistfights, and parkour-like traversal. Like I mentioned before, considering the minuscule budget, I was impressed by how good the film looked. I won't give anything away, but there are moments where, logistically, there had to be some sort of special effects added in post-production. But the movie does a good job of hiding whatever tricks it uses to pull them off. The main exception is one shot in the final act involving Henry firing a rocket launcher in a confined room. It had a very green screen composited look to it that was very fake, but the rest of the shots look solid. Part of this almost certainly has to do with how the film is shot, which was accomplished by GoPro cameras on a head mount of the various stuntmen playing Henry. And this actually leads to my issues with the film. First off, I don't know if you can truly consider this to be a found footage movie, or at least a conventional one. It's established at one point that what we're seeing through Henry's eyes is being recorded and broadcast, and I personally consider the main role of found footage to be that the camera whose footage we're seeing for the movie is a physical object in the movie's world that people are using, like something that notable examples like Cloverfield and Chronicle stick to. So let me just say that if you're the type of person who gets motion sickness from the likes of those kind of movies, as I've heard many people do, you should steer clear of Hardcore Henry, at least in theaters. I've never experienced anything like that before, but there were moments in this that were so frenetic, I felt like mild headaches coming on. But they weren't frequent, and I saw this on a bigger than usual screen, so this would probably be fine for most if you watched it on a regular sized theater screen, or certainly it's just a TV. Part of this is that there is a ton of shaky cam at use in this film, which I'm never a fan of, but I suppose it was unavoidable considering how it was shot. It goes so far that I would say that the final big, climactic brute fight, which you can see some of in the trailers with a bunch of white-suited guys on a rooftop, it's kind of a mess. I just had to assume certain things were happening because it was so hard to follow. The film also has a bit of a lull in the middle when Henry visits this dimly lit whorehouse with Jimmy to get more information and equipment, and there's a fight and stuff. Both the plot points and the action scenes in them felt less inspired. I also noticed the video got very blurry, which was likely a result of the lighting. And I was concerned for a bit that the movie wouldn't be able to regain its focus, both figuratively and literally, but once it cuts to a daytime motorcycle chase afterward, it regains its footing and it's just constant fun again. Generally, pretty much everything else is fun and enjoyable. I'd seen a lot of reviews before going in that said the story was horrible dreck and secondary to the action. The latter is certainly true, but I never felt like the story was insulting my intelligence like I worried it would. It doesn't try to get truly grim or emotional. It has some outlandish elements straight up, but it strikes a good balance between being silly and between delivering straight up gritty action. I'll also say the movie ends very abruptly and has a last minute twist that quite honestly I had guessed before I even entered the theater. But with the kind of movie this is, these kind of things are easier to forgive than most conventional movies. As violent as Hardcore Henry can get, especially the last on-screen death, which is both fantastically and creatively gory, it has a feeling of fun and lightheartedness to it, and a big part of that is definitely the aspect of Jimmy. Henry repeatedly runs into him, but every time Jimmy gets killed somehow, only to reappear a few minutes later with the same face and memories of Henry and everything that happened before, but a different outfit and overall persona, like a hard-edged cop type, a rambling hobo, and a coke-snorting maniac. Copley is a blast to watch in this movie, and the eventual explanation for Jimmy's resurrections is both ludicrous, yet completely appropriate for this kind of film, and makes for an entertaining scene when it happens, and some fun concepts for the remainder of the movie. He's the character we see the most, not counting, Henry, who we only see the hands up for the most part. So it's fortunate that Jimmy is constantly entertaining. Estelle, on the other hand, is a very generic damsel-type character for the handful of scenes she's in, but thankfully, Aiken is also wonderfully over the top and fun to watch every time he confronts Henry. He's the perfect kind of baddie for this kind of movie. If Hardcore Henry's core gimmick sounds uninteresting to you, you'll probably have a hard time getting behind the simplistic story. But for me, this is the kind of movie I envision when I hear people say things like, if you turn off your brain and just go for the ride, you'll have a great time. Its gimmick is exploited in the right way, which results in a very unique and engaging thrill ride of an action movie. Apparently it hasn't been doing that great in the US, even with the small budget, but considering that there's no sequel bait, and this feels like an approach that could lose its charm really fast by being repeated. I'm looking at you, Paranormal Activity. I'm okay with this being a one-off, and I recommend it to anyone who is intrigued by the concept.